and are not really something we can depend upon. There's a whole lot of things that might make us feel good, like if the Chiefs get beat tonight, I'd feel real good if that happened, But that's not an objective standard, and an objective model will not allow us to come to that conclusion. But when it has to do with how am I supposed to live and how I'm supposed to prepare for eternity and be a good citizen and be a good spouse and a good father and grandfather and all those things, then we can't do any better than what the Bible says for us. The basis for this first little section here, and we're going to go as far as we can. I think we'll complete this one and then look into another one, maybe which is out of line with what it should be, but nonetheless, we'll do it nonetheless because of the material that's involved in it, is that when it comes to the fossil record, okay, believe it or not, I read when I was very young, brethren saying this, that God put the fossils in the ground to test our faith. Now, don't you think about that for a minute. God put fossils, and what they were saying and what they continued to expand upon was that obviously there was no such thing as dinosaurs that lived, but God put the bones or the fossilized remains of those dinosaurs in the ground, and that would then allow us to have a stronger faith. Now, obviously, a person, regardless of how well-meaning they might be in that idea, that is the very opposite of what Bible faith is all about. When people approach what the Bible refers to as faith as nothing more than feelings, maybe even deep down gut feelings, it's still nothing but feelings. And our feelings are very subjective and can cause us to draw a number of different conclusions. And we can attribute that to many different things, and some attribute it to the way God makes us feel. How many times have we heard people say, I wouldn't trade a pile of Bibles that high for the way I feel right here in my heart. When they're patting their belly when they're saying that, which means it's a gut reaction, that they're not going to let the Bible be their guide. They're going to go on how they feel. They say, how do you know you're saved? Because I feel saved. Well, how does that feel? You see, that's not sufficient. There has to be a biblical basis for what we do, and even in regards to matters like this. So that's ridiculous. I mean, that's crazy. I can't believe that people would have made such a statement as that. And, of course, even some of our own brethren. Why would they approach this subject any different than they would any other subject? It's unexplainable. But it could be because people were led to believe that evolutionary theory was established just as surely as mathematical facts, and that this world is the result of evolution that began some 16.5 billion years ago with the Big Bang. And they thought because the evidence proves that to be the case, then obviously we got a problem with Genesis chapter 1. But do we really have a problem with Genesis chapter 1? Is it possible that the whole concept of evolutionary theory is contrary to established scientific fact? And the fact of the matter is, it is. And this is really only a new phenomenon. But rest assured, the Lord knew that people would come up with goofball ideas like this long ago. And so he addressed those matters in language that we can all understand. It's called human language, as God revealed what he had on his mind. And he told us about all these things that presently confuse many people to the point that they will compromise the biblical record to somehow leave room for evolutionary theory. Now, that's sad, but it does happen. When it comes to the matter of fossils, keep this in mind. We all have the same fossil record. The evolutionist has the fossil record. The creationist has the fossil record. They're the same fossils. So what's the difference? Why is it that we're so far apart, poles apart, when it comes to the fossil record? After all, we're looking at the same record. It has to be with how you approach that record. It has to be with how you'd explain what's transpiring in this fossil record. That's the only difference. And of course, we realize that according to evolutionary theory, which we've pointed out repeatedly throughout this study and will continue to, because it shows the utter foolishness of the whole thing, is that in order for evolution to be true, then something had to come from nothing. something that's called spontaneous generation. And I remember, and I've said this before, and hopefully you remember too, or maybe this is one of the few things I remembered in school, is that Louis Pasteur showed that you cannot have any such thing as spontaneous generation taking place. You could not have non-life giving birth to life. You can't have inanimate objects and rocks, or even a pile of clothes sitting in the corner, and then all of a sudden, presto changeo, there comes a litter of mice running out of the cloth. And yet that was what some people actually believed. Man, we see a correlation here. Here's dirty rags, and then here's mice. I mean, how are you going to explain that? Other than, obviously, the mice came from the dirty rags. Well, that's not so. And we know it's not so. And that was a clear indication that somebody was thinking in a scientific way as it relates to what produces something else. There was an effect here. What caused it? Well, obviously, when you start off with nothing that's living, you're not going to have something that is living from something that's not living. It don't happen that way. That's spontaneous generation, and that's ridiculous. And we made this point as well. Even if you granted, which we're not willing to do, even if you granted there was such a thing as spontaneous generation that took place, at some point in that time frame that this supposedly happened, either a non-human mother gave birth to a human baby, or a non-human was transformed into a human at some point in time. And it had to have been as simple as he's walking through, maybe fell down out of the trees, and he's walking through the jungle one day, and he picks up his foot, and when he picks up his foot, he's a monkey, but when he puts his foot down, he's a human. How scientific is that? Also, we want to go with the other option. That is, a non-human mama gave birth to a human baby. And see, the thing is, not only did that have to happen, but at some point in time, that non-human mama that gave birth to that human baby has got to have the same thing happening with the opposite gender so that we could be here today. Because there had to be two of them. And really, it all boils down to that. Now, I'll just tell you, and you know it too, is that people want us to believe that if you give something enough time, the impossible can happen. There's a reason why the word impossible means impossible. It ain't going to happen. It's not going to happen. Impossible can't happen. If it's impossible, it's not capable of being happening. And yet that's what's essential in order for evolution to be true. So here's a person who says, well, you don't realize, Freddie, you got to have all these billions of years and all these multiple millions of years in order for this to take place. But at some point in that time, one of those two options is absolutely essential. One or two of them is. Which one is it? And when you take that position, whichever one you take, how scientific is that? Well, it's not. It's not at all. One of the reasons why we end up with this problem, that is getting along with the so-called, and I do mean so-called scientific community, is in relation to what this world actually is presently. There's a big word that is actually promoted in, if you'll notice, in 2 Peter chapter 3 of all things. In 2 Peter chapter 3, here's a concept that the Lord knew that people would fall back on at some point in time. And it's a concept that we have defined as, and has been defined as, uniformitarianism. Now you can see in that big old word, uniformitarianism, the root word in there is uniform, okay? So what uniformitarianism says that everything continues today as it's always continued. Everything that's happening in the year 2025, it happened in the year 2025 before Christ. And then millions of years before that. Everything has transpired all that time. Well, let's see what Peter writes about that by inspiration in chapter 3 of 2 Peter. Somebody wants to read that. Start reading in verse number 2, if you don't mind, and read through verse 5. No, verse 6, excuse me. 2 Peter 3, 2 through 6.
That ye may be
Oh, wait a minute. Scoffers, which is just a nice way of saying mockers, people are deriding first century Christians, and they're saying, y'all are talking about the Lord coming back. Well, you got to be kidding. I mean, everything is on the same record as it's been going on since man was here. Everything's just following this same exact pattern all along. Well, that sounds pretty good until Peter says, whoops, you forgot about something. What was you forgot about? You forgot about the flood. Uh-oh. Well, is that a minor problem that throws into question all this thinking, everything is continued as it was from the beginning? No, it's not continued as it was from the beginning. And so that's led to the biblical concept of the history of the world, catastrophism, because there was a big catastrophe. And that big catastrophe was a worldwide flood. Isn't that amazing? Now, if you just overlook the... Exactly. And that's the whole, why is it that you have these sea creatures on the top of mountains? Now, we're not saying that the Himalayan mountains or any other huge mountain range was in existence prior to the flood, but how do you end up with all the upheaval that took place during the flood? Then how is it the case that things did just not come about where you got the small one-celled organism on the bottom and then you got man at the top? Why is it you've got some of these small one, two-cell organisms in the same strata in which man is? How do you explain that? Well, they had to be around at the same time, that's how. So we've got the same fossil record, we got the same evidence, but it matters how we approach the evidence. How do we approach the fossils? Would it surprise you that in the fossil record, and of course when we talk about the fossil record, we're just talking about what has been found by mankind in his digging, that 60% of the fossils that are found are seafaring creatures? Well, what would that sort of go along with, if not a global flood? Of course it'd go along with a global flood. Now we'll think about this here in a minute, but I want us to simply look at this particular PowerPoint that I put together as best I could. It's not great or anything, but we'll seek to explain it as we go along. And of course, I can remember, and that's one of the benefits, one of the few benefits that is available for living a long time, is that the things that I saw in my high school science book when I was a freshman, now, if they've got that same picture and that same so-called evidence in science books today, then they're just flat out lying to your face, whether they realize it or not, because it's not so. And we're led to believe that all we have to do is dig about anywhere we want to, and we're going to find all of these pre-human races of people, those that are not quite human, but they're getting close. And we've been told they're all right there. But the only problem is there never have been any transitional forms ever found. And what so-called scientists have attempted to do is to show us some of our ancestors, or at least show us the evidence that's available for some of our so-called ancestors that obviously at one time swang through the tree like Tarzan's monkey, Cheetah. I never really understand why he named his monkey Cheetah, because cheetahs, anyhow, nonetheless, that's what Tarzan did, and Tarzan do what he wants to do, I reckon. So let's look at this just a few minutes. Now look at this particular matter here. Now there's a whole lot of things that we see in the world that might fit into the category of that being a skeleton of, or a fossilized skeleton of this particular creature. This was supposed to be, Ida was supposed to be the first link to all humans. This is it. Now, do you have any kinfolks that are similar to that in their bone structure? I don't think nobody's got a big long tail, do I? It looks like a squirrel. Looks like a squirrel to me too. What in reality, this that was supposedly a transitional form from ancient chimpanzees and ancient monkeys to a human being is actually a lemur. Well, of course it looks like a lemur. It's not anywhere close to being a pre-man bipedal creature. as everything was supposedly falling in line. And of course, this is all they have of Lucy. And what's amazing is so many of these things that you'll see in these pictures. It's amazing how that from one joint of a finger, they're able to construct a whole human being. Isn't that amazing? What do you have to be able to do to be able to accomplish that? You got to have a wild imagination, what you got to have, you know. But there ain't nothing scientific about that at all. So here's Lucy. And Lucy is a pretty recent model because this exact picture was on the front page of some Time magazine or something like this, because she was supposedly discovered in 1974 and rose in fame to be the transitional form we've been looking for all these years. But upon closer examination through real scientific study, Lucy was found to actually be a male ape that was related to a pygmy chimp. Well, you know what? A chimp is a chimp, and human being's a human being. You know, it's like me and Carrie was talking about here the other day of all the scientific research that's gone into finches. And it's an interesting study. I've seen documentaries on it. And what's amazing on these so-called educational channel on PBS, here they're telling about these finches that over billions and billions and billions of years, their beak kept on growing further and further because the plants from which they got the food kept on getting deeper and deeper. But you know what's interesting about that change that took place all that time? The finch was still a finch. It's still a finch. It didn't say, you know, I'm tired of doing this. I'm going to grow me some arms so I can get out here and grab these flowers instead of having to stick my beak down. They didn't do that. Why is that? Because everything reproduces after its kind. Same as a pygmy chimp. It reproduces after its time. Here's a fossilized skeleton that was discovered and claimed to be the first link to humans. It was later found to be nothing more than, excuse me, I'm on the wrong page. Yes, I'm human after all. Almost. Anyhow. Initially, this was thought to be an ancient ancestor that we supposedly shared this combination with the chimp world, but after further study, it was shown that this was simply in the family tree of a chimp. That's all it was. You'd think if it's supposed to pass as an intermediate form, there'd be more to it than just a skeleton like this. Now, you can look at that all day long. If you want to see in that something that's not there, then you'll end up seeing it. That happens all the time. People will look in the mirror all day long convincing themselves they're pretty when they're not. It's a matter of what your motivation is. Then you got Neanderthal man, one of the most famous of all of these supposed these missing links that we've simply been looking for. It was claimed to be the missing link in human evolutionary chain, but after sequencing the genome of this Neanderthal, now think about that. Here we're getting real scientific now. They went into the genetic code of this rascal and found it to be a chimpanzee. That's it. So when you put these ancient discoveries that were classified and put in school textbooks as if here is the transitional form, upon closer examination you find out, whoops, it's just an ape. That's all it was all along. Oh, excuse me. Java man. Oh, here's one that's really outstanding. Java man was developed now. This fellow over on the left, if you go to a museum, and I think this was found in Arkansas of all places, so you find the missing link in Arkansas. Why Arkansas? Well, couldn't it have been Mississippi, or Missouri or somewhere? I don't know. But anyhow, they had fossilized teeth and a portion of a skull and a thigh bone of this rascal. And it was found out when they did some more actual research, the Java man fossil was actually proven to be the kneecap of an elephant. And then another, a man's femur, and the kneecap of an elephant. But that sort of looks like a skull. If you're going to give all types of room for skull-like things that you dig up in the ground. And then there's the famous Piltdown man. This fellow was developed, and the thing is, here you're told they'll put this whole picture up here, and they'll say, this right here was found. Well, that's not being honest. That came about from a fossilized jawbone in the upper portion of a skull that was discovered in England and claimed to be a proof of evolution. Later on, it was found to be a fraud. The skull was found to be of a modern human, and the jawbone was found to be from an ape. The teeth had been filed down and treated chemically to make them look old. So if you're getting paid big bucks to uncover some of these things, then you might sort of cut corners on your scientific method to try to get somebody to pay for it and put it in a museum somewhere, and you can live high on the hog because you've deceived people into thinking that this is some kind of transitional form. Nebraska man. A single tooth was discovered and broadcast as living proof of human evolution. Now, the only problem with Nebraska man here is they constructed this whole fella from a tooth that was later proven to be the tooth of a pig. Now, if you can take a tooth and say, oh, man, there's one of our parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, and then find out you're kin to the pigs instead. And then you got a hobbit man. Several bones were discovered in Indonesia and claimed to be from a human ancestor, recently argued by some to be merely the skeleton, the bones from a human being that had Down syndrome. Yeah. But it's still a human being. It's not a transitional form. Rhodesian man. Rhodesian man's remains were found in a zinc mine and displayed in the British Museum of Natural History as a stooping human ancestor due to his hips. Later, he was found to be merely a modern human whose hips had been crushed. Now, somebody fossilized me, and they'd know for sure I was some kind of crazy monkey somewhere because they can't walk upright. Obviously, since he can't walk straight up, he's got to be a missing link. And don't nobody amen that. Then you got Calaveras man. An ancient skull was discovered in a mine shaft thought to be over 1 million years old. It was later found to be a hoax, and the miners placed it there. But it already made its way into Time magazine and Scientific American, all these different publications. All the while, it was a hoax. Then there's Heidelberg man, based on a single lower jawbone, and there it is. It was thought to be non-human because of how big it was. And modern humans don't have jaws that big. Reckon they've ever seen the jawbone of some of these NBA players? Or do you remember a fellow by the name of Goliath who was nearly 10 foot tall? Has there been some large creatures that lived in the past? Obviously, there's a lot of large creatures that live today. Some of them have problems in their genetic code, and they keep on growing, don't want to. But it's still a human jawbone. It's not an in-between species. And then, I like this one really good, Flipper man. A collarbone was found in Libya and thought to be from a primitive ape man, later found to be fossilized rib of a sea mammal similar to a dolphin. So you go from a fossilized rib of a dolphin-like creature and say that's a human being? How scientific is all this stuff? It's the very opposite of scientific. Then you got this fella, Orca man. The reason why his picture's up here is because a skull cap was discovered in a Spanish village of Orca and claimed to be from an ancient child ancestor of humans. Later it was found out that this was a skull cap of a 6-month-old donkey. So we find out here's a missing link between not humans and apes, but humans and donkeys. Ain't that amazing? You never would have known. And then there's the famous Cro-Magnon man. He was thought to be a recent missing link species between humans and our alleged ape-like ancestors. Now it's acknowledged to be nothing more than a modern man. That's all it was. And they did that through DNA technology. It's nothing more than a man. It's not in between a monkey and a man. He's a man. Just as monkeys are monkeys and men are men. There's all different types of monkeys out there in the world. But there's a difference between a monkey and a man. There are no transitional forms. Humans and ape fossils are dug up every year, and they will continue to be. But the fact is, there will never be the scientific proof necessary that would cause us to reject the biblical record and adopt something like the billions of years that are essential in order for the impossible to take place. Which one actually makes more sense? A number of years ago, the question was asked, why do most so-called intelligent people accept evolution? It's because they've been told that most so-called intellectual people support evolution. That's the only reason. If you're a dummy, then you'd believe something like the biblical account in Genesis chapter 1. But if you're really smart, then you'll buy into the impossibility of evolutionary theory. All right. This is a chart that I took a whole lot of time to put together. I wanted to take all the words off of it, but I was unable to due to the amount of time that was involved in doing the previous chart. So, here's what I want us to see. And we mentioned this before. You would expect a whole lot different situation in the fossil record if the way things are now have not changed from the way they were at the very beginning. You would expect a whole lot of different things, but that's not what we see. And the explanation for that and the scientific proof that abounds in regard to that is the fact that most of these people reject any such concept as a global flood in which the fountains of the deep broke up. The catastrophe that took place in the flood in which all of humanity was wiped off the face of this earth, as well as the animals that lived on the earth, except Noah and his family and the animals that were on the ark. Now, there were some animals, obviously, that could have lived throughout the flood because they lived in the water anyhow. But here's what we see in just a simple little 5th grade presentation of how fossils happen to come about. What are fossils? A fossil is any trace left by something that lived in the past. Animals, plants, and humans have all left many fossils. Some of the most famous fossils are those of dinosaurs. Would we really want to have dinosaurs roaming the earth today? Could we ever tame a T-Rex to plow our garden? I would not want to be around because I'm afraid he would revert back to his flesh-eating business as soon as I said, go a little faster there, Mr. T-Rex. I got to get this row plowed before the end of the day. And so here's simply some pictures of fossilized remains and what they would have looked like on the right. How are they formed? Well, and think about this. Why do most things that die not end up as fossils? They weren't covered up quick enough. Now, we've made this observation of the difference between swelling and growing, you know. When you go down the road and lo and behold, there's a possum in the road, and then you go by the next day and it's about twice as big. None of us say, boy, that possum's growing. Obviously, that thing is really healthy. No, it's getting bigger, but it's not growing. And before it gets too big, then what's going to happen to it? If the state don't go pick it up, which is what they used to do, I don't know if anybody does that anymore, then it's going to be eaten. It's going to be scavenged. There's going to be these huge, ugly buzzards that are there in the middle of your road, and they're taking what they want, and then it'll get down to the very smallest of creatures that will dispose of that. So fossils don't just happen in nature as something that transpires all the time. There has to be some dramatic upheaval that takes place in order for it to happen. If you were walking along in a cemetery and you stumbled and fell in a grave and hit your head and it knocked you out, and all of a sudden there's dirt being thrown in on top of you, that's not a normal way to go, is it? That's an accident. Are there some accidental fossils that have been made down through the years? Well, obviously so. There's all kind of. Are fossils that remain that are easy to be detected, are they because of foul play? Have you ever heard of anybody throwing their spouse or somebody they knew in a well that was deep? Well, could that have looked like an ancient person somewhere down the line when it's uncovered? Well, possibly. But when you think about how it is the case that fossils are created, it's because they're not given the opportunity to rot and decay. They're not given the opportunity to be eaten and taken care of by vultures and other such animals. They are covered up quickly. And so here's the step 2 in the process. It's not always the case that animals end up being eaten up like that. In some instances, an animal or a plant gets buried very quickly. No scavengers can find it. Oxygen, which is a major cause of decay, cannot get to it. Even in this protected environment, much of the soft tissue, such as fur and skin, decays. But the harder structures, like teeth and bone, then they continue to last, for sure. After the animal is fully buried in the soft tissue, such as skin, muscle, and organs, begin to decay, just like they normally would. However, the hard bones don't decay as fast and allows water that contains minerals, such as silica, seep through the bones and teeth, which leads to step number 3. And in all of this, you see, in order for there to be all of these animals in the same pile of rubble, in the same layer of the earth, the only way to explain it is there had to be some catastrophe that transpired. And that catastrophe, of course, is identified in Genesis chapter 6, 7, and 8, and it's the flood. You've got all this mass of living creatures that are found in the strata. Tina and Ricky have gone out to the Grand Canyon, and they've seen this up close and personal, where all these different things are there in existence, just like you would expect they would be with something like a flood.
They call it a dinosaur graveyard.
A dinosaur graveyard.
And that's because a lot of it, we went to a place one time where all these bones from all kinds of different dinosaurs were collected down in this area. And how do you explain that? In other words, they got washed down there.
Exactly.
As a group, and no telling where they came from to get washed into that area, but it just happens that they got washed in there. And then when the flood receded, then why we know that, as far as now we discovered, because they just happened to be closer to the top of the layer of the sediment that they washed into.
They can, exactly. And so, without a doubt, there will be thousands and thousands of fossils discovered if the world continues to stand, because they're still there. That's where they were deposited during the flood. And when you talk about a graveyard for dinosaurs, obviously the dinosaurs didn't say, when we start getting old, we're going to all go to this same place and die at the same time. Well, again, if that happened, if you say, well, I'm going to go to the graveyard and I'm going to get ready to die, well, then you're going to be taken care of by the vultures yourself, even though you're a huge dinosaur. You're not going to be covered up. You're not going to dig a hole and put yourself in, obviously. Now, human beings, they have the opportunity to choose the graveyard in which they're placed. But when we think, if somebody uncovered a graveyard of humans, this is some kind of explanation for man's existence because all these dead people are in the same place? Well, of course not. But the same cannot be true with a graveyard for animals, for sure. Many of these fossils, when they were discovered millions of years or hundreds of years later, the original jaw bones had turned into rock, and that's one way they're found. The animals, in some cases, the animal is buried and decays entirely. But when it does, it leaves a hollow mold that preserves the shape and size of its bones. Another type of fossilization occurs when insects, like mosquitoes or flies, get trapped in the tree sap that's called amber. And that's a very interesting study about amber as well. Research sometimes amber and the Nazis in World War II. It's very interesting, valuable type of material. Step number 4, the fossils uncovered. The dirt that once covered the animal erodes away, leaves little bits of the fragments exposed. That's when scientists discover the fossils and begin to uncover it. Some people think that this process of fossilization must take thousands or even millions of years, but that's simply not the case. In fact, a miner's hat has been found that has been totally fossilized, turned into rocky mineral. Also, a Western boot was found that had a bone inside it that had been fossilized. The boot, however, had not fossilized, which shows that some materials like bone and fossilize better than other materials like leather and animal skin. Do some research as well on Mount St. Helens and how many so-called fossilized trees were uncovered after that event and were said to be millions of years old, when we know it was less than 10 years old because they were standing upright before they were covered up with intense pressure from Mount St. Helens. So the whole idea, well, the way things are now is the way they've always been, simply is contrary to established fact. What could have buried them so quickly? Obviously, the flood could. And here's a Indiana Jones type creature here. He's working out there with animals. What's the 5th step? Well, here's the scientist coming in. Once a fossil is discovered, there are many things that must be done in order to make sure that it's dug up properly. If you're about to uncover and you see what you think is a part of a dinosaur, then obviously you don't take off with your mattock running through the middle of it and trying to find something. No, you're very careful because obviously people are going to take that thing and study it and put it in a museum somewhere. And so you have to be real careful, and the people that do that are called paleontologists. Paleontology is the study of ancient life, and there's the root of it. Paleontologists take their job seriously. They work very slowly and very carefully. When fossils are found, the location is marked on a map, and then scientists begin to take pictures of the entire area. Sometimes huge bulldozers are used to remove large mounds of dirt. Other times, the fossils are embedded in rock layers. They use picks and hammers. We know all that takes place. There's a fellow that I went to Freddie Hardeman with by the name of Gary. He goes to the Middle East and digs. He's not looking for fossils. He's looking for ancient civilizations. He's been on the side of digs that uncovered cities that supposedly were not even, never even existed, but the Bible recorded their existence, and thus with the turnover of the spade of people like him, then they were to find those type things. And then they take those remains and put them back together, and then you put them all together like that, and then you make movies about it and all. So is there such a thing as almost intact, fossilized bones of ancient reptiles that are on display? Well, sure there is. But the point is these were not fossilized over billions of years, nor millions of years. It took place, obviously, the reasonable and rational scientific explanation is the flood. You know, that's why people who are so wedded to and so enamored with evolutionary theory have to be loud in their opposition to anything that would jeopardize their house of cards. Because their house of cards is the furthest thing from scientific. It cannot be explained other than mind is eternal and God is perfect mind. He brought this universe into existence just as He designed it, and He gave us the information that was necessary to lead us to conclude that to be the case. And it's found in the Bible. To reject the Bible is to reject the wisdom of God that gave us the opportunity to look back on this situation and seek to expose the foolishness that's passed off as education in our present society. And don't ever be intimidated to compromise what science shows to be true. And that's what's essential if you're going to be an evolutionist. Why are fossils important? Because they tell us about creatures of the past. Dinosaurs, kids will buy dinosaur coloring books. They'll have replicas of dinosaurs, all these types of things. And they are interesting to study. I mean, you can go just so far with a dog coloring book or a horse coloring book. When you got dinosaurs, you got all kinds of things that are scary, and you wouldn't want to have one of them in your backyard. Any comments or questions on that particular material?
You know, people talk about how it took millions and millions of years for dinosaurs and all that couldn't happen that quickly. But you look how quickly the flood destroyed North Carolina, you know, and the destruction that it did in no time, much less how 150 days or how many days.
Sure.
You know,
I mean, if you saw when Helene or whatever that hurricane was called, when it came through North Carolina and East Tennessee, I saw a video of this woman was in her house, and here comes a 12 to 15 foot wall of mud coming by her house. Now, it didn't take millions of years. Do you think they're going to continue to be pulling people out from under that rubble? What does that prove then? That it took millions of years for those people to be swept downstream and be covered up by feet, if not yards, of mud? Well, of course not. We know it took place just like that. And the tremendous pressure that would have been exerted during a worldwide flood and all that transpired then, obviously there's sufficient scientific fact to account for what we see in the universe today, in the earth today, that was the direct result of that huge upheaval of the way that things had been previously into what we have in existence in our world today. I mean, everything. There's a good little old video on YouTube about the beautiful Sequatchie Valley. You know, how was the valley formed? Did it take millions of years for the Sequatchie River to dig out the trench that we live in today? Or can that happen almost instantaneously with a whole lot of water? Well, obviously, it takes place instantaneously. Man, well, it had to be a whole lot of water to create the Grand Canyon. Sure did. And every other canyon that there is. But that's what happens in our world today. Any other questions? Any other comments? All right, next week we want to spend some time with the distinction that the Bible makes between human beings and animals in and of themselves. And so be ready to think about that for sure. And I'll try to have